Welcome to Train Signal. You are watching the video for Lab 2, Introduction to Group Policy. In this video, you will learn how to create and organize Active Directory objects. So over here, we will quickly create some users, some OUs, and I will show you how to organize it for the benandbrady.com network. Then you will use these organizational objects to assign group policy, and I'll also show you how to create, edit, and manage group policy. In particular, we'll look at the two default policies given by Microsoft, namely the default domain policy and the default domain controllers policy. So in this introductory video to group policy, you will learn what a group policy is and how it is actually assigned. In the following videos, we will use group policies to actually create policies that affect users in the benandbrady.com domain. So let's get started. I'm going to minimize this screen and let's make our connection to DC1. And in DC1, let's once again look at our Active Directory where we have progressed so far. So I'm going to open up Active Directory users and computers on DC1. And then let's check our progress so far. So if I were to go to the domain controllers link over here, I should be able to find my two domain controllers, DC1 and DC, which is actually DC2. And then in the computers container over here, I should be able to find my client computer, which is client 1. So we are working fine over here. I'm going to minimize the screen and then go on to the DNS. And let's have a look over there as well. Over here, what we should expect to find is our DNS zone in the forward lookup zone known as benandbrady.com. And in there, all three of our computers must be registered as 200, 200, 201 for DC1, 202 for DC2, and then 211 for client computer, which is client 1. So all our computers have registered all right in the Active Directory. Our DNS is working fine as well. Last but not the least, the replication between the two domains. So I'm going to go to Active Directory Sites and Services and make sure that under default first site name, under servers, we need to expand DC. And then in over here, we're going to replicate from DC1 to DC2. So I'm going to select this, right click, and click on Replicate Now. It has successfully replicated. And again, select this, Replicate Now. It has successfully replicated. So before you do a major task, it is important that you verify the replication between domain controllers and just make sure that your Active Directory is coming up okay. I just wanted to show you this because in the last video we had just installed Active Directory and created DC1, DC2 and Client 1 as objects in our domain. And this is the first time that all the two computers and one client computer is rebooted. So we want to make sure our connections are running fine. Physically, where we can connect to each other, as well as logically within the Active Directory benandbrady.com domain. So we are all right so far. The next task then is to actually create objects in benandbrady.com. And you may be familiar with this process. The common Active Directory objects that are created are organizational units, users, and groups. By default, all the users are created in this particular container over here. But it is not a good idea to populate all the users in this particular container because the users folder that is given to you is simply a container. You cannot actually assign group policies to this particular object. That's the first reason. The second reason is that you would like to organize your domain so that the right user is in the right OU, and OUs are reflected by departments. So for example, if you have two departments, let's say finance and marketing, then you would like to create two OUs and put all the users in a finance department in a finance OU and all the users in a marketing department in the marketing OU. This way, your domain is organized just like your organization chart is organized for your company. Looking at the organization chart, you should also be able to look at the Active Directory domain and then be able to find the users in that particular domain. So what we are now going to do is create organizational units for benandbrady.com, and in those organizational units, we will create users for the employees of benandbrady.com. So let's get back to our notes over here, and I'm going to go to the next figure over here. This is what I have envisioned for benandbrady.com. benandbrady.com has two branches, California and North Carolina, and in each of these two branches there are three departments. In the California branch, there is marketing, accounting, and sales, and in North Carolina, there's marketing, accounting, and sales as well. So let's create this organizational structure for benandbrady.com on DC1. So let's get started. So to begin with, I will create these two OUs, North Carolina and California. So let's do that. Going back to DC1 over here, because I'm creating the organizational units, under benandbrady.com, like you saw in the figure over here, it is important that I click on benandbrady.com, right click, go to new, and then select organizational unit. Over here I'm going to create the first organizational unit, which is California, and then the second one, which is NC for North Carolina. So these two are done. Now within California, so let me first select California. Within California, we saw that there are 3 OUs: marketing, accounting, and sales. So let's do that. I'm going to select California and then quickly create 3 OUs. First one is marketing, accounting, and then the third one would be sales. We'll do the same thing under North Carolina very quickly over here. So again, create accounting, and then the second one would be marketing, and then the third one would be sales. Very well. So our domain looks similar to what we had envisioned over here for benandbrady.com. Okay, 2 top level OUs, and then within those OUs there are three OUs or sub OUs within it. The whole idea behind this is to organize your domain. So let's have a discussion as to what an organizational unit is and how is it useful in our domain. To begin with, the organizational unit is created so that you can organize the objects in your Active Directory. So rather than create all the objects under users, you can create OUs and then put the appropriate objects in those OUs. So now my domain looks well organized. If I have a user who works in the accounting department in California, that person's user account can be found over here. In fact, you can also move the computer accounts from the computers container over here, namely client 1, to over here, where the appropriate computers are for the OUs. And that is a common practice that is done for various reasons, where the reasons we are going to discuss in the videos soon. Okay, so the first reason to create OUs is to organize your network. The second reason you create OUs is because you can now delegate the responsibility of this OU to some other person. So just to show you quickly how that can be done, I'm going to right click on the OU called California, and then over here select this item called delegate control, click on it, and then follow the wizard, click on next, and then over here it's asking me who do you want to delegate this to. I'm going to click on add, and because of a lack of a different user over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the group called users, click on the add button, click on OK. So over here you would ordinarily pick up a user who you want to delegate the responsibility for this OU to. This would be the junior administrator who's helping you administer the network, so that the common and the mundane tasks you don't have to be bothered with. So for every time the users call in saying that, well, they cannot log in because the password is not working, for password resets, you can assign a task to this person. So I'm going to click on the next button over here, and over here you can assign exactly what you want this person to do to this OU. So over here, these tasks are organized into 3 different categories. The first 3 tasks over here are under the category of users. So for example, if I click on this checkbox, over here I can create, delete, and manage user accounts for all the users in that particular OU. Then the second one is password resets, and the third one is to read user information. So these are the 3 tasks that are assigned on the user level. These 2 tasks are assigned for the groups: create, delete, and manage groups, modify the membership of a group. So every time you would like to create a new group, you can do so. And if you want to change the membership of a user from one group to another, you're able to do so over here. And the third one has to do with linking group policies that we're going to talk next in this video. In other words, if you were to assign this task or delegate this task to this user would be able to take a policy and link it to this OU. And then click on the next button, and then you will simply finish this task. So this is how you assign tasks or delegate tasks to other users in the network so that they can manage that OU. I'm going to cancel out over here because this is not the object of this video, but I just wanted to show you what are the different reasons you create OUs. So the very first reason is to organize your network. The second reason is to actually delegate responsibility so that some other user is now responsible for the users and the groups in this OU and in the sub OUs that follow. Also, remember, you did not have to click on all the checkboxes. You can assign exactly what task you want the junior administrator to perform in this particular OU. And that junior administrator will be able to perform those tasks only for this OU. For example, if you told this person or you delegated the task to reset passwords for the California OU, this junior administrator now cannot go to North Carolina and reset somebody's password. Those set of tasks or those set of delegations will work for California OU only. So once again, OUs are a great way of delegating tasks. You can delegate certain tasks to certain people, and those people will be able to perform those tasks only within that OU. So rather than create administrators in the network where the administrators group can actually go to any of these objects and create new users or modify them, what you do is you create specific OUs and then delegate those OUs to those users. So that's the second reason why OUs are created. The third reason, and that is the object of this video, why OUs are created is so that you can assign policies to these OUs. Let me show you how this is going to work. I'm going to take you to this particular network diagram over here, and let's watch it in full screen. So let's say that here is our network benandbrady.com, and in our domain you have this top level OU California, and then you have sub OUs sales, marketing, accounting, and let's say there is a user called Jill Smith who works in the accounting OU. Alright, now you can create what is known as group policy objects, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. But once you create the group policy objects, which are nothing but settings that you assign to users, for example, you saying that, well, I want to create a group policy that will assign or deploy the application Office XP to users in the California OU. So once you create that object, you have to assign that object to that particular OU, and that's the arrow that you're seeing over here. So here are my group policy objects 1 and 2. The first group policy objects in this figure is Office XP policy, and the second object over here is the drive mapping policy. Once I've created these group policy objects, they are a distinct set of objects that have no relation to the benandbrady.com unless you actually start applying them. So what I'm trying to say is that over here there are three different objects. The domain object over here, the OUs and the users, that is one set of objects, and then the third set of objects are the group policy objects, and they have to be linked together. So once I create the group policy object, I can link it to the California OU, and now all the users within the California OU will get the effects of that policy. I can also link it to a lower level OU. So for example, over here is my second group policy object known as drive mapping, and this I've linked to the accounting OU. So only users in the accounting OU will get the effects of this policy. Users in marketing, sales in California will not actually get the effects of that policy. So that's the third reason why you create group policy objects. You create group policy objects so that you can actually assign them to organizational units. And we will revisit this figure later on once you've understood more, or once you have clearly understood what exactly can you do with these group policy objects. But I just wanted to show you over here because we are discussing the different reasons why OUs are created. So to summarize, OUs are created to organize, to delegate, and then finally to be able to apply group policy objects to users in your network. Very good. Now we are ready to move on and understand exactly what a group policy is. So what I'm going to do is minimize the screen on DC1 and then go back to our lecture notes over here. Going on to the next figure, here is what a group policy object does. Here is one of the technical definitions of the group policy object. Group policy is a feature of Active Directory that enables you to manage user and computer configuration from a single central point of administration. Of all the different definitions that I found about group policy object, this one I believe is perhaps the most complete definition. Let's go through this. It's a feature of Active Directory. So once again, in order for you to take advantage of or actually use GPOs, you must have Active Directory. What this means is that you must have Windows 2000 or better. Windows NT did not have the concept of Active Directory, so all that I'm teaching you over here will not apply to clients if you have Windows 98 or Windows NT computers. You must have Windows 2000 or better, namely Windows XP and Server 2003. That enables you to manage user and computer configuration. Let's talk about this. User configuration. For example, every time a user logs on, you want to make sure that the user cannot access the start button. I'm sorry, not the start button. You can do that as well, but you want to make sure that users cannot click on start and then go to the run button. That's what I meant. Or let's say that every time a user logs on, you do not want them to change the background of the desktop or change the colors, or you do not want them to change the settings of the Internet Explorer because they keep coming to you again and again and bothering you that they cannot visit certain web pages because they've set the security levels at a different level. So you can manage all those objects, all those features using group policy object. And then just going a little bit further in this definition, from a single point of administration, meaning that you do not have to visit computer to manage these. All you have to do is go to a central server, namely the domain controller, and then over there create a group policy object and make sure that you assign the group policy object to the right people. So that's where this figure came in. Here's a group policy object. If you assign it to this OU, then all the users within this OU will get the effects of the policy that you set up over here. So that's the user configuration. What about computer configuration? Well, you can say that every time the computer starts, check the group policy and see if an application needs to be deployed on that particular computer. Or every time the computer starts, run a particular script so that drive mappings are done for you. In this manner, every time the computer boots up, you can make it look for certain policies, and then if those conditions are met, certain things will happen on that computer before the user even logs in. And there is a distinct difference between user and computer configuration. User configuration meaning that when a user visits a computer, depending on who the user is and the location of that user in the Active Directory, meaning in which OU this user belongs to, the user will get certain settings and not get other settings. Computer configuration, on the other hand, means that regardless of who the user is, when a user uses the computer, they will all get the settings that were assigned in the computer configuration. And then everything can be administered from a single central point of administration. This is great. What you have to do is create the GPO only once, and if the GPO can also meet the requirements of other OUs, you can keep assigning them. Let me show you what I mean by that. So not only are you going to create the GPO once, but let's say that this drive mapping GPO is now suitable for users in a sales department also. So users in a sales department would like to access similar resources in the accounting department. What this drive mapping GPO, and we're going to create this exact GPO called drive mapping, is going to do is that every time a user logs on, they will get a drive mapping such as X drive, the Y drive, and Z drive to certain folders in their domains. So let's say that the users in sales OU would also like to get the same kind of drive mapping. So you do not have to recreate this object one more time. All you do is you also link this by creating an arrow like I'm showing you over here from drive mapping to sales, and then once a link is done, then the users in sales will get the same settings from this GPO like the users in accounting did. So central point of administration, meaning that you create the group policy object once, and once it is created, you simply manage it by assigning it to different OUs. In fact, if you recall, that's one of the reasons why we created the OU, so that you can link the GPOs to it. Then going further in group policy objects, it's an object that can contain one or more policies. So once you create a group policy object, what you can also do is create several policies within that one policy object, and then each of those policies will be applied in the order in which it was created. So if I have 3 different settings that I would like to give a certain OU, I do not necessarily have to create 3 different GPOs. I can create one GPO, and within that GPO define the 3 settings, and those 3 settings will be applied to the objects or to the users in that particular container. And finally, we keep saying about it is important to link a GPO. Where can you link a GPO to? You can link a GPO to a site. A site is a geographical location. For example, going further in this video series, you will see that we will actually create 2 different sites, one California, the other North Carolina, for benandbrady.com domain. This would be discussed in Lab 16, Active Directory sites. Now, if you have 2 different sites and you would like to apply a GPO so that all the users in that geographical location are affected by that GPO, well, you can apply it to a site as well. Or you can apply it at a domain level. Domain level meaning that if I apply the GPO over here, if you were to see this arrow of Office XP policy on benandbrady.com, all the users in this particular domain, benandbrady.com, that means all the users, will get that policy assigned to them. So you can assign it at the site level for the entire geographical location. You can assign it to the domain level for that particular domain. And the distinction is because in one particular site you can have 2 domains. So for example, I have a site called California. In California, I can have 2 distinct domains, benandbrady.com and jackandjill.com. So that way I can make sure that if I want the policies to go to everybody, I assign it to the site level. However, on that site, if I would like the policy to go to certain users in a domain only, then I would like to assign it at the OU level. Or if I want it to go to all the users in a domain, I will assign it to the domain level, which is benandbrady.com. And GPOs can be linked to sites, domains, and lastly to OUs. And actually linking them to OUs gives you the most control because you can now exactly distinguish between one set of users and another. And what Microsoft has done is given us two policies, the default domain policy and the default domain controllers policy. The default domain policy controls the domain object, and the default domain controllers policy actually is applied to the domain controllers OU and controls all the domain controllers. Now what I'm going to do is take these two policies and show you in general how to use group policy objects. And in the videos to come, we will create our own group policy objects and configure it for benandbrady.com. So let's minimize this and let's play around with the two policies that Microsoft has given us to us by default, the default domain policy and the default domain controllers policy. Now these two policies can be accessed by going to admin tools and then clicking either on this button or in this button. So I'm going to click on the default domain security policy over here, and I'll be able to see what my policy looks like by expanding security settings and so forth. I highly recommend you do not, at least in the beginning, visit these policies in this way because it is not clear as to exactly how these policies work. Instead, what I would like you to do is the following. Go to Active Directory users and computers, and now to access the default domain policy, look at a word, the default domain policy. This is the policy that is applied to the domain. So what I need to do is click on my domain, which is benandbrady.com, right click, go to properties, and then go to the tab called group policy. This is how you must access your group policies, and I'm going to do this in this manner in this video. So I'm going to click on group policy objects, and now I can show you exactly how these group policies work. So by default, the policy that is linked to this OU, so you don't see the arrow over here, but this is what this basically means because you went to the properties of benandbrady.com. So the policy that is linked to the benandbrady.com is called the default domain policy. And if I were to select this default domain policy and click on the edit button, I will be able to see how this policy is configured. Now, every time you go to a policy, you will find the same set of objects over here, or these are containers that is used to organize your policy. There are literally hundreds of settings in these policies. So to make it easier, Microsoft has organized these settings into computer configuration and user configuration. The settings in the computer configuration apply to all the computers in that particular container. The settings in the user configuration actually apply to users in that container. So going back to our figure over here, if I were to set up the policy Office XP and then go to, let me take you back over here to the user configuration and make changes over here, it will apply to all the users in the California OU. So if you're a user in the California OU, you will get the settings of that policy. If I were to modify the computer configuration, and then in that case, I must have my computer account in California as well. If you recall, by default, the computer accounts are created in the computer's container. So I have to move my computer account from there to over here, and then the settings of this computer configuration will be applied to me as well. So in other words, to summarize this, we can control the group policy either for users, meaning who's logging in, or to computers, namely what computer objects are in this OU. Now, you have to go to the appropriate location to configure appropriate policies. So let me give you a little tour of this. The first setting over here is the software settings. This basically is used for application deployment, and this will be the object of discussion in the next video. The second item over here is the Windows settings. This is where all the security settings are done for the computers. This is perhaps one of the most visited policy objects. For example, if I were to go to account policy, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, if I were to go to password policy, these are the default password policy setup for us. For example, minimum password length is 0. If you would like to change it to a certain number of characters, let's say 5, you can do so over here. So from now on, every time a user every time you create a user object, the minimum password length has to be at least 5 characters, or when the user changes the password, the new password should be at least 5 characters, and so forth. There are different policies under the accounts policy. And then there is a lockout policy, and then finally there are local policies where you can assign audit policy, user rights, and security options. And I'm sure you're familiar with these objects. This is where it is done from Active Directory. So the default domain policy controls how your domain works in the Active Directory. So I'm going to take an exit out of here and show you some other things over here as well. If you would like to see what other policy, if you would like to see what other group policies you have in your domain, one of the easiest way to see that is by clicking on the add button over here and then click on the all button. So if you recall, by default you have just two policies given to you, the default domain policy and the default domain controllers policy, and you can see these over here. So once again, to see all the policies, I know this is a roundabout way of going this, but this is the only way it can be done in Windows 2000. Click on the add button and then go to the all, and now you can see what policies actually exist. Alright, now the next thing is, how about if you would like to delete a policy? We will actually not perform the act over here, but if you were to select this and then click on the delete button, it will ask you, what do you want to do? Do you want to delete just the link, or do you want to delete the entire group policy object? I'm going to cancel over here because I do not want to delete the default domain policy, but let me explain to you a little bit better as to what that particular dialog box meant. When you say that you would like to delete a link, what you're saying is that you would like to delete this arrow so that this policy is no longer linked to the California OU. Alright, so the policy still exists, and it can be used to be, it can be linked to other containers within your domain. However, you just deleted the link between Office XP and California. So that is deleting the link. Deleting the link is simply taking away the arrow so that this policy no longer applies to California OU. The policy still exists in the domain. So what you can do is take this policy and link it to some other OU. This is done when you do not want to restrict a certain OU or no longer want to give Office XP, for example, to the users in a California OU. Then the other item over there was to delete the policy itself. What you're basically saying is that I would like to delete this object Office XP policy. If you delete this object, you're automatically also deleting all the links to that object, namely the link to California. So deleting the object group policy is a major task. By doing that, you are actually deleting the entire object. Deleting the link simply says that you're no longer applying that particular group policy object to that container. So that's what we saw over here. When you clicked on a delete button, those are the two items, and then we politely refuse to do any of that. And then if you would like to create a new policy, remember, you can create multiple policies within the same group policy object. So here's a group policy object, a default domain policy. And if I would like to create new policies, I simply click on the new button over here, and then it will ask me for the name of the policy. I'm going to call it ABC. And then once the policy is created, it is blank. What I then have to do is click on the edit button and then edit either the computer configuration or the user configuration to give this policy teeth. In other words, it can do certain things within that particular domain. And I'm going to delete this because I just created one simply to show you. In this case, it would be appropriate to not only delete but also remove it permanently from benandbrady.com. Are you sure you want to wish to permanently delete ABC? The answer is yes. Okay, so that's how you create group policies. And by the way, when I created the group policy, I also linked it to this particular OU or this container called benandbrady.com, simply because I went to benandbrady.com and then created the group policy object. So by doing so, not only are you creating the object, but you're also linking it to the benandbrady.com network. Now, just a little word over here about Server 2003, because in this particular package, you have received the CD for Server 2000 as well as for Server 2003. What I've shown you over here, how to create policies, how to delete it, how to manage policies, was done by right-clicking on the object. In this case, for example, the benandbrady.com object, and then going to the properties. In Server 2003, Microsoft has a new tool known as Group Policy Management Console. It's also known as GPMC, and this tool is discussed extensively in Server 2003. One of the improvements in this tool is that you can visually see what I've done over here. For example, over here, this policy, default domain policy, is actually linked to benandbrady.com. Like I showed you over here, you can see the linking arrows, but unfortunately in this particular screen over here, you cannot see that this is actually linked over here. Or if you want to see all the group policy objects in your network, you actually have to click on the add button, even though you don't want to add, and then click on the all to be able to see all the group policy objects. All this has been addressed by Microsoft in the Group Policy Management Console. So using that tool for Server 2003 has has visually created a lot of new screens that lets you see exactly what these policies are and who they are linked to. So just wanted to throw in a word over here so that once you do Server 2003, you will see that there is a tremendous improvement in the way group policies are managed in domains. So I'm going to click on this close button. So that was our first policy, namely the default domain policy. The second policy is called the default domain controllers policy. Now look at the word, default domain controllers policy. This is the policy that is linked to the domain controllers OU, or the domain controllers container. The domain controllers container contains the computer objects for our two domain controllers. So any policy that I give over here will actually apply to the entire domain controller, or to all the users who log onto that particular domain controller. So let's go and see this policy. So once again, to actually view and edit this policy, you need to click on the domain controllers OU, right click, and then go to properties. And this time we will go to group policy object over here, and then expect to find default domain controllers policy. Click on the edit button. And now I just want to show you a few differences. If I were to go to Windows settings and then go to security settings and look at account policies, you will see that, well, the policies are not defined. The policies are defined, these policies such as minimum password length, enforced password history, and so forth are defined for the entire domain. So these settings should be set from the default domain policy, not from the default domain controllers policy. Okay, so it is used for two different reasons. The reason I brought it up over here is simply because no matter which policy you go to, you will always find the same settings. That does not mean that you can go over here and then go under account policies and then change the minimum password length to let's say 5, and it will apply to the entire domain. That is not true. You have to be in a certain policy to be able to make certain changes for the entire domain. I know this sounds confusing, and I would rather that Microsoft had grayed out the areas that you cannot use in certain places, but they haven't done so. You will see that this generic object over here that shows you computer and user configuration is basically present in every time you create a new policy. So you don't not only have to know what policy to create, you also have to know where to create certain settings in certain policies. So just to give you an example over here, under domain controllers OU, where you have the domain controllers policy, let's go under local policies, and in local policies let's go to user rights assignment. There are certain rights that I can set over here. For example, and I'm going to make one change over here. Let's go to the right that says log on locally. So what I'm going to do is go down the list over here. Let me just reposition my window a little bit over here. And these are the different user rights. If I were to go down the list over here and find the right that says log on locally, I'm right over here. If I double click on this, you can see that by default, the account operators, the administrators, the backup operators, print operators, server operator, and the TS internet user have that right to actually visit or sit on a domain controller and log in locally. Well, one of the things I'm going to do is click on the add button over here and assign that right to the everyone group, to the special group everyone. So by doing that, what I'm doing is I'm actually giving everybody the right to log on locally, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So let's finish this task. I selected the everyone group, clicked on OK, and then click on OK one more time. Click on OK over here as well. The reason I did that is because from time to time, what I will do is log in as a user to the domain controller, and by doing so, since I'm a user and logging onto the domain controller locally, I need this right log on locally. Otherwise, I'll see a box that says that you're not allowed to log on interactively to this computer, meaning that you do not have sufficient rights. And this also gave me an opportunity to show you that a right such as that should be done under the default domain controllers policy, simply because now what I've done is the following. Let's see if we can follow this logic over here. I'm going to click on OK. I set up the policy over here. The default domain controllers policy is applied to the domain controllers OU. And in that policy, we said, well, you have the right to log on locally. So what have I done? I have given any user who actually visits DC1 or DC2 to be able to sit on that computer and be able to log on locally to that domain controller. I do not have to do this separately for DC1 and DC2. I simply give it to the container. Because this container has the two objects DC1 and DC2, it will apply to both of them. So this was a first introduction to group policy, and the object over here was to show you how to create these group policy objects and how to make changes in our network based on that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and populate our Active Directory with some users and computers. So what I'm going to do is the following. Just to get you started, what I'm going to do is create the first user object, and this is defined in the lab book that you've received as part of this CD. I'm sorry, the users container is already open. So according to the labs that I've set up, what we will do is the following. In the California OU, we will create a first user in the accounting OU, and this user will be called Jill Smith. So let's go ahead and create this user object. So right click on the accounting OU, new user, and the first name over here is going to be Jill. Last name is Smith. The logon name is J Smith. We'll click on the next button over here, and then a password we have selected is password with a capital P with the number 1 at the end. So once again, the password is capital P, number 1 at the end, and we'll keep everything the default the way it is over here, and then click on the finish button. And we have successfully created our user J Smith in the accounting OU in California. In this manner, what I would like you to do is, before I end this video, I just want to show you this particular screen, and I'm going to do this offline as well. What I would like you to do is create the following users in the following OUs. So for example, you will create a user called Jack Straw, whose username will be JStraw with a password of password1, capital P with the number 1 at the end, and you will create this user in the North Carolina marketing OU. So you will actually go to, let me just quickly show you, you will go to North Carolina, and in there go to marketing, right click, new user, and then create that user. So in this manner, what I would like you to do is create the following 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 users, and the reason we are doing this is so that I can log in as different users, and these users belong to different OUs, so I can show you the effects of the GPOs on these users. So what I'm going to do is create the same users myself offline, and at the end of this video I would like you to do the same so that you can follow all the labs in this video the way I'm showing them to you on the screen. So to summarize this topic, what we did over here was to create and organize Active Directory objects. I also showed you how to create organizational units and how to manage those units, and I showed you the reasons why organizational units are created. We saw how the organizational units are used to manage group policy, and then within the group policy I showed you how to create a policy, how to link it, how to edit it, and then we saw that because the group policy is linked to different OUs, it can have different effects to different users in those OUs. So this brings us to an end to the introduction to group policy video. I thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you very soon in a different video in Active Directory.